Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Simplifying Life with Kashira. Have you ever come across someone's word and thought, wait, that's exactly how you think and feel? Well, that's what happened with me when I first found Jamie White online. I felt like someone was speaking my thoughts and almost like holding up a mirror. And I just knew right away that I have to reach out to him and have him on this podcast. So, Jamie White, ladies and gentlemen, isn't just a business strategist, he's someone who sees the human behind the hustle. His work goes beyond solving business problems, and it's about helping people reconnect with themselves and build lives that actually feel good to live. So, today on Simplifying Life with Kashira, we dive into redefining success, navigating fear, and living with clarity and joy. Jamie, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you so much.
It was really lovely to hear your introduction. And you touched on so much of the essence of what my work is all about. It's helping people be themselves. I think so often we feel we need to perform a certain way, and how we should be apologizing for how we are. Um, and life gets a hell of a lot more free, a lot more light, and a lot more enjoyable when actually we just come to terms with we are who we are. We don't need to be apologizing for that. And we certainly don't need to be putting on some sort of performance. In our truest sense, in our most naked sense, is enough. It's okay. And in actual fact, sometimes when we do that, that's the gift, or that's the very essence that we've been looking for, that brings about the change that we've wanted for so long. So it's funny. My work is lovely in that I see it. It's making things easier, and it's taking away the performance. It's taking away the kind of the presumption of how we should be, and in doing that, generally speaking, people hit this flow that so many say they're seeking.
Yeah.
And it's weird coming to terms with it actually being perhaps a little bit easier to achieve and right in front of us than we thought.
I absolutely hear you because I echo with everything that you just said. Being authentic, being yourself, it's so important in today's time wherein life has become so much of a showbiz. So I absolutely understand the value of every word that you just said. I'm really interested in knowing how did you actually got on this journey that you are on right now? What was that instinct that you felt that okay, I need to start sharing my thoughts, start helping out people? How did all that start for you?
Yeah. I think, as you shared, that the first kind of thought that came to mind was like I was a messer. So I was the bold kid in school. I was the one that got into a lot of trouble, and I think when you're confronted by challenges, like you go into class a certain way and you're told, hey, you shouldn't be like this, and you do certain things almost impulsively, and it's disruptive.
Yeah.
It brings about quite a lot of introspection. It really challenges you to review yourself,
Yeah.
and that journey can be quite troublesome in early years, because sometimes you think, oh God, I should be a certain way. And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't quite appreciate that the very essence of your nature that's really special, and perhaps it might not suit your environment, and so you suppress it. So I found myself going on quite a deep personal journey first and foremost, just because of my disruptive nature. Perhaps my parents were just fantastically free and encouraging of me, but yeah, I caused a bit of trouble. I got into a bit of trouble, and I very quickly learned to look at myself in the mirror, and I trialed and experimented, and some things were fantastic, and other things I perhaps suppressed parts of myself I never should have. But that constant approach to reflect, um, and seek to kind of, let's say, better myself, encouraged this behavior. And I think oftentimes our journeys can be messy at times. It can work and then it doesn't. But my process, when I think about this, I think about it in my earliest years of like being aged 8, 9, 10, and doing it consistently ever from there. And I think when you see a journey through to a certain degree or a certain time, it starts to become obvious, and others perhaps that are following a similar path almost magnetically become attracted to you. It's like there's something energetic that just knows
Absolutely.
you you've gone on the journey I've been at. And so I found myself having, like, perhaps at 16, 17, having these incredibly deep conversations and personal conversations with friends initially, and I didn't think anything of it. But that journey quite naturally evolved throughout my 20s, where I was just the person that had these very deep, sometimes labeled intense conversations, but I loved them. I loved talking about life. I loved talking about, how we show up in the world, what works, what doesn't, how perhaps we can tweak or refine. So when I reflect back, and I think Steve Jobs beautifully put this, he said, like, things don't necessarily make sense when you're in the middle of them, but it's only when you look back that you can connect all the dots. And for me, I can see that I was always on this path. I absolutely love it now. And I can see how, like, me as a troublemaker in my early years led me to doing a lot of personal work. That personal work led perhaps to a lot of others coming to me, not necessarily because they saw me as inspiring, but I think just because we were sharing similar journeys. And then the more as I progressed on that, the more I learned to kind of help people quite naturally, and I've kind of been developing that ever since. So it's a very true life journey, really, is the best way I describe it.
Yeah, and that's beautifully put across that when you look back, things start to make sense and you're able to connect the dots. So you spoke about a lot of troubles that happened in your early years. Was there any particular incident, something that really made you feel that you need to bring a change, maybe in yourself or in the world around you, something like that, that, that thought process in you that I need to think in a different way than the way I've been till now?
Yeah, it'll seem a little bit random, but I went to the dentist when I was 12, and I got 7 fillings, and it was excruciatingly painful, and it
Mhm.
was like it was really painful, and it upset me so much. The dentist said, Jamie, if you keep eating the way you are, you're going to lose all your teeth. And my gums were really numbed out from all the painkillers, and also my gums were all cut up from all the fillings. And I remember just being so horrified. And so I was like, well, what do I do? How do I make sure this doesn't happen anymore? And he said, well, look, Jamie, stop eating sweets, stop eating fizzy drinks, stop eating chocolate, all this. And I did. I
Mhm.
actually, like, immediately speaking, I was like, right, I'm not experiencing this again. And what was really interesting for me was that almost immediately, I was a 12-year-old, perhaps I was a bit hormonal, but my skin cleared, and I started bouncing out of bed in the mornings. It's like I had a bit of a depression at that stage that lifted, and it was that one, let's say, incident that provoked quite a dramatic change on my side that then showed quite dramatic results. Suddenly my grades went up in school. Suddenly I was happier. Suddenly I was more social. And these things play out in classrooms much more obviously, but suddenly you start getting invited to more parties and that kind of thing. And my life shifted really dramatically. And I could notice it. I was like, this is interesting. I think for a 12-year-old, I look back and I'm in awe, but I'm like, wow, I noticed that the better I looked after myself, the better I showed up. And the better I showed up, the better the world rewarded me. And that, I think, inspired, let's say, okay, well, if I did this quite severely here, let's do the next one. And a lot of my friends would
Yeah.
always joke, like, Jamie, you don't shy away from challenges, and you'll try everything twice. And that's been a philosophy that perhaps came from that. I've
Mhm.
followed through numerous times since, and it's aided a lot of learning, a lot of kind of accelerated growth as well. So it's a bit of a random insight, but that's certainly where I go back to. Oftentimes, it's a huge kind of turning point for me.
Yeah. The way they say change begins from within. So when you brought those changes in yourself and you saw things changing around you.
Yeah, there's a philosophy that essentially it's an inside out world, and most of us we aren't really where we want to be because unfortunately we're being distracted by the outside world. and we want to change our circumstances. So we do all this in the outside world, when in actual fact, if we only just looked in the mirror and really truly worked on ourselves, the world changes quite dramatically. And I remember hearing that and thinking that was a bit wishy-washy. I was like, but what does that mean practically? And it's actually quite simple. Like, if you have a bad night's sleep, you wake up the next day, you're cranky, you're irritable, and you're generally quite pessimistic as a result. So you
Mhm.
see things more negatively, just
Yeah.
simply because of night's sleep. On the other side, if you have a good night's sleep, you're all the more likely to look after yourself all the better, to show up better, to be less irritable, more patient, more understanding, more empathetic, and see the world more optimistically.
Yeah.
So a simple thing like a good night's sleep dramatically changes how we see the world and how we interact with the world. And if you start pulling that out to like the food you eat, the company you keep, whether you exercise or not, the entertainment or media you consume, the work you do, you can actually have a very, very dramatic impact.
When did you start this Insta channel, or let's say, when did you start sharing your thoughts publicly? Was it like good number of years back, or just like,
Gosh, I actually had quite a public life years ago. So I in Ireland used to run all the nightclubs in Ireland. And I used to host like 30 nightclub events every week. I had a team of about 800 part-time staff all around the country promoting these nightclubs. So I actually had quite a public life, and then I had these two online magazines, and they had 1 million readers a week. So there was always quite a lot of attention around me. I perhaps wasn't as public on social media then, really because the platforms were in their infancy. But I've always had this idea that, some people will volunteer, some people will donate. But for me, when I really looked in the mirror and I thought, what's the highest value you can give it? To me, I
yeah,
felt it was my experience.
yeah,
And kind of had this idea that if somebody could learn off the back of your experience, off the back of your challenges, and in actual fact, it could speed them up on their journey. It could help
yeah,
them save time, save money, save energy, increase their impact. That would be the greatest gift you could give. And so from around, I would say about 10 years ago, I just thought it was a beautiful thing to share my experience, to share the lessons I've been learning. And I've I've been doing it quite casually, let's say, since. But just if I'm going to share a post on social media, I want to share a depth or a learning or an experience that I've had that might be valuable to somebody else. But more so, I suppose, over the last 6 months, I've decided, right, actually, let's take this a bit more seriously. Let's like, I actually worked with a creative writer because I wanted to learn to write better. I worked with the producer to learn to communicate better. And so I've kind of taken that approach over the last 6 to 8 months, and that would be the work that you're seeing and have tuned into on Instagram.
and I'm glad you decided to take it seriously and go public with it, because that's how I got to know about you and came across your profile. So
Mm,
yeah, thank you for doing that. It's really wonderful.
pleasure. Yeah, no, it's lovely.
Yeah. I wanted to understand from you, what has been your thought behind inclining more towards this peace part, going slow in life and being with yourself?
It's fascinating for me how you sometimes can get to a certain point and be like, wow, I'd been pursuing this for some time. It's nice to feel a level of being here. Um, my philosophy goes very much back to that night sleep analogy. So what I noticed very quickly is that if I got a bad night's sleep, I would have to really pull myself out of bed. I'd be angry with myself from the night before. Why didn't I go to bed earlier? And I would
Yeah.
be irritable throughout the day, and I would create problems for myself. I noticed that I had to discover what was good for me and what was bad for me. And so many of the bad habits were quite almost societally or environmentally impressed upon me. So what does that look like? That looks like, as an entrepreneur, we glorify getting less sleep.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good. We don't prioritize diet. So we generally eat bad, fast foods, which have us not feeling good. There's not a very karmic understanding of how you engage with people. In actual fact, early entrepreneurs, a lot of them are encouraged to be harsh, be tough. You can't have friends in business, and karmically that
Yeah.
doesn't feel good either. And these examples play out in all areas of life. That there's generally a way in which you engage with life that either has you feeling good or has you feeling bad. And my approach was like, well, wow, I figured this out with sleep. Let's figure it out with food. Let's actually
Yeah.
figure this out in terms of showing up relationally with friends, showing up with a partner, showing up in work. And I have just found myself experimenting on and on with what works for me, what doesn't. I'm always amazed. I kind of think you feed an angel or you feed a devil. And as a result, an evil comes through you or a good comes through you. And and what I found is that more and more as I learn to look after peace, if I in times look after myself less and less, I find myself rushing, stressed, burdened, heavy. And that the more I tune into that, the more obvious that becomes. So I've put a much higher value on being calm because I find that when I'm calm, I feel so much better. When I'm caught out of sorts almost reactively, I not only do I feel bad in those spaces, I feel rushed, but I
Yeah.
find I make bad decisions that force me to be more rushed. On the other side of that, the more calm I am, the more time I have to make decisions. The better decisions I make, the more time I get. So on both sides of the sphere, there's a compounding impact. The better I look
Yeah.
after myself, or sorry, it's over here. The better I look after myself, the better things are for me. The easier it is to look after myself better, the better I get. On the inverse of that, the worse I look after myself, the easier it is for things to get worse, the harder it is for them to turn right, the worse things get, and so on and so forth. So there's like a law of momentum. One is a downward spiral, and one is up, 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 and away.
And I think more we rush into anything, we only make wrong decisions. It's always a wise idea to just slow down in every aspect of life and you just start seeing a different world altogether. Because I was a person who always used to be in rush, whether it comes to speaking, eating, or doing the dishes or any kind of work. I was always like, I need to do this, I need to do that. And then I realized that I ended up making more mistake when I was being in rush. So I
Look, there's a kind of a line that I think it rings really true to what you've just shared. It's that you either learn or you loop. And most of us find ourselves in these loops where we just keep repeating the same patterns.
yeah.
And that happens because we're so busy.
Mhm.
Whereas when you slow down, it becomes almost impossible not to see the loops. And if we can
Yeah.
see them, perhaps we can give ourselves time to figure out different ways. And that's the whole idea of coaching is somebody comes to us in a life full of loops and thinks that there's no other way. And the process is to help somebody slow down and see and indeed trial and experiment with other ways so that they can ultimately speaking learn, progress, grow, and enjoy a whole new lease of
Yeah.
life rather than keep going around and around in a loop.
Yeah. Yeah. Jimmy, have you had any fears in life?
Oh yeah, constant.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah. Like, look, I'm over here in Rio at the moment on my own. I was scared to death coming out. Uh, like, there's a loneliness that comes up, and there's a fear of loneliness. And then there's a fear of what might unfold, being in a new city, not knowing people. And then there's the much bigger concerns of like, I'm 38, I'm single. There's a fear that perhaps I won't find a partner, perhaps I won't have a family. I'd love to have a family. And there's a fear of a life unlived. Um, and then there's a fear of a potential. Like one of the biggest burdens, I think, on anyone when they start working on themselves is that they realize how capable they are. And soon beside that comes a fear of not perhaps realizing that potential. And And so there's tons of fears, and they're really, I would think they're really natural. They're really part of life, but they're really present and there.
Basically, what will happen tomorrow? I think that's one of the most common fear a lot of us have, and that sometimes it holds us back because when we start thinking too much about what will happen in the future, we start feeling more intimidated by the future thoughts.
I think there's a kind of like an ego in a lot of us where we want to say that we're fearless,
Mhm.
and I actually think our fears are an important part of us. Our fears keep us grounded. So like
Yeah.
I ride a motorbike over in Bali. I spend most of my time over in Bali, and when I hop on that bike, I have very present fears of like, God, I might crash, might have an accident, and those fears actually keep me in balance,
Mhm.
and they keep me sacked.
Mhm.
The same way, like the very fears that I've talked about, like fear of being single forever. Well, what
Yeah.
does that do? It makes you really cherish a connection when it comes and respect it and not fuck around.
Yeah.
Uh, Fear of unrealized potential. Well, that's going to keep you working on yourself, and that's
Yeah.
going to keep you actively growing and expanding. Uh, a fear of travel and being alone. Well, in actual fact, that helps you appreciate connection all the more, and at the same time, appreciate the familiar. So, like the
Yeah.
fear is coming up, it's unfamiliar, and what it does is it places the familiar into a higher priority. So, I think sometimes we don't quite appreciate how valuable our fears are.
Yeah.
And the same is true with most emotional states, like people that go through anxieties, upset, depression. Most of the time, society would have us run away from those emotions, but in actual fact, are those states. But in actual fact, when we really sit with them, there is a value. And I think it's only when we realize that value that we bring those states into a greater sense of groundedness or control.
Yeah.
Um,
I really like this thought of allowing your fears to guide you in the positive direction. That
mm,
is a beautiful way of looking at it. As long as your fears are not holding you back, I think they could be a really great thing.
I think it's very true. There's a philosophy around stress. You know, a lot of us are avoiding stress. We don't want stress in our lives, but
Yeah.
stress is really unavoidable. And
Yeah.
I kind of think that for those that are avoiding it, unfortunately
Mhm.
speaking, they become less capable of dealing with it. And as a
Yeah.
result, uh, life starts to shrink because they can't deal with it.
Yeah.
Whereas if instead we choose a different narrative and we lean into stress and we get better at working with stress, we can deal with more stress in our lives and our lives can expand as a result. And I think it's the same with fear. We run away from our fears instinctively, but in actual fact, if we look at them head on and actually understand them, generally speaking, we can see their value and we can learn to work with them better. So think I believe, I feel there are numerous societal norms around the likes of fear, the likes of depression, the likes of anxiety, where instead of sitting with these states, we run away from them. And in running away from them, we become less capable of dealing with them. And we find ourselves on a downward spiral as a result. When instead, so much of my work is about learning to sit in these states, look at them head on, learn from them, and work through them as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, Jimmy, when someone comes to you overwhelmed, what's the first thing you look for or ask that helps create space for clarity and change?
Oh, well, I generally give them a hug and say, well done. And
Sorry. Say that again. I missed the first line. Really sorry.
yeah, no, if somebody comes to me feeling like stress and overwhelm, I generally give them a hug and say, well done. Um, the key thing is that in times of stress and overwhelm, there's an instinctive reaction to isolate. We withdraw and we ruminate on those feelings and those states, and that really doesn't serve. So if somebody comes to me, I celebrate them because they're doing the very thing that actually is the cure. They're reaching out for a bit of a hand, a bit of support.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's all we need in a time of overwhelm, is to sit with another and for them to empathize with where we're at. We don't
Yeah.
feel so alone as a result. we actually feel strength from our connection, and that might be all that's needed to turn the
Yeah.
circumstances around. So, there's a kind of a thought around coaching that a coach is a healer, or even for healers, that healers have magic hands. When in actual fact, generally speaking, what they do, or what we do, is we just help people feel safe enough to step up for themselves. We help people feel supported enough to overcome whatever obstacles are in their way. And
Yeah.
that's at the really important thing that we need to remember, is that we are much more powerful than we know, than we give ourselves credit for. It's just sometimes life would fool us and have us thinking otherwise. And it's only in true, real connection
Mhm.
where we start to begin to realize who we are. And with that, we can turn circumstances quite dramatically around.
There's so much of power in sharing your thoughts, your vulnerabilities with someone who can empathize, who can understand your thoughts. Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think about? There are so many people out there who do not really even have one good friend or have that kind of a social circle, that kind of a a close net in whom they could confide or share their thoughts, their stress. There are a lot of people in these in this time today. What do you say to them? How to go about dealing with their stress or overwhelm?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of answered it in your question initially, or in your
Mhm.
response to where it is in the opening up. It's in avoiding the isolating nature that so many of us have in those times, and that
Yeah,
ruminating process, just thinking it's
yeah,
just us. So the kind of encouragement for when life is getting on top of you,
yeah,
um, connect, open up. Oftentimes, those that love us the most can help us remember who we are and what capacity we have, can remind
yeah,
us that we've been through tougher challenges and we are stronger than whatever is unfolding, that we can do what we need to do to change our circumstances. So sometimes a simple chat with your family, your friends, your partner can, exactly as we said, be all that you need. And so, what
yeah,
is it that we can do? It is lean into the vulnerabilities, lean into opening up, to not think that we need to know everything ourselves and that we need to be so unbelievably comfortable and confident on our own.
yeah,
We as
yeah,
beings thrive in connection, and we're all the stronger with a partner by our side, with good friends behind us, and a family surrounding us.
yeah,
And so to lean into that, um, that's a huge cure in itself.
yeah. Do you think writing it by yourself about your thoughts and your stress can help in case you do not really have any person to share your feelings with?
Can exploring thoughts on your own in a journal be helpful? Absolutely, it can. A pen and a journal are to the mind what a gym is to the body. Uh, to write is to exercise the mind. And it's oftentimes when we do put pen to paper that we bring clarity to our thoughts and that we see things differently. So, as a first port of call, it can be an incredible, helpful tool to help us think more clearly and
Yeah,
perhaps see different possibilities for ourselves.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's one of the most kind of talked about processes in self development and inner healing, and it's justified. It's hugely powerful.
Yeah, I like to say that if you have good social circle, if you have good trusted friends, you're really blessed. A lot of people do not have that. But I like to talk more about the ways, through which these people can share their thoughts and feel a little less stressed and feel more fulfilled in their lives. So yeah, one part, as you rightly mentioned, is about the journaling, and it is really powerful. You can just put across your thoughts on paper, and I think when we put our thoughts on paper, we start feeling that level of clarity. For example, we're stuck in some kind of a problem, some kind of a stress, and all of a sudden, as you start writing things, you start feeling, oh, all right, my head is clearing up. Your
Yeah.
problems, your confusion is clearing up. So that's a really powerful way of sorting out stress by yourself, just in case you don't have anyone.
Yeah, sometimes like the nice thing is that a page will never complain about what you write,
I like
uh,
that.
and it will take all that you have to give it.
Yeah,
And so sometimes it can be an enormous release just to write out whatever's going on in here. And if here has an outlet, sometimes it might go away. So it's a hugely helpful process.
Yeah. What role do rest, boundaries, and intentional living play in a world of high achievers? Because you like to talk about success, entrepreneurs, and burnout. It's such a common word these days. I remember I interviewed one gentleman a few days ago, and he just changed the way I see burnout. He said that burnout is not when we are overworked. Burnout is when we are doing something with which we are not aligned.
Mm.
That is burnout. And I was all taken in by that because it is so true. Sometimes we work for 12, 13 hours, but we are so passionate that we feel still excited. But when we are not aligned with our work, we're like all drained out and exhausted. I wanted to collect your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So it's a really good subject, and it's something I think we all should be really conscious of.
Yeah.
Um, I feel burnout comes oftentimes when we aren't working in balance, when whatever output we're putting out isn't being balanced in terms of reciprocation. And, people are quite one-dimensional when it comes to burnout. We think, oh, we only burn out in work, and it's like, no, we burn out in relationships too. We know the friend that, for example, is like we're constantly sharing so much love with, but they give nothing
Yeah.
back, and we can
Yeah.
burn out socially in that respect. We know the relationship with the partner that we are putting so much work in and not getting something back. And very soon, actually, that seems to feel insulting. It becomes irritable. It becomes hard to do the things that you naturally do in relationship. It's burnout relationally. And we see it in work where we are putting a disproportionate amount of energy in, but not getting the energy back that we should. It's burnout. It's amplified by the disconnect in alignment. So
Yeah.
if we don't feel like we're working for something that we love, or we're in love with our partners, those sensitivities are all the more prevalent. But on the other side of that if we are in love with our job, perhaps actually that covers up the energetic imbalance. And so behind it all is the energetics of life. And really, burnout is the clearest sign that something's out of sync here. There
Yeah.
isn't a balance. And it's a big reminder to ensure that for whatever it is that you're doing in life, or how you're interacting with life and other beings here, that there's balance and there's reciprocation. And of course, there's exception. And sometimes we can go over and beyond for a job, for a partner, for a friend, for a family member, but it cannot be the norm. So burnout is actually a really helpful tool. It helps us remind us that, hey, this way of living, this way of being is not sustainable. And you deserve better.
I agree with that. To conclude this amazing conversation, I am going to throw one final question to you. What are some practices or mindset you encourage to help someone reconnect with joy and live more purposefully?
I'll give you the simplest one, um, which is before you go to bed.
Uh-huh.
And by that, I mean like when you're in bed, but before you close your eyes and fall asleep. And when you wake up in the morning, so just as you've woken up, but before you've opened your eyes, uh, ideally have your hand over your heart and say, I love myself. Now, that might seem real simple, right? But what will happen, generally speaking, is as you put your hand over your heart and you say, I love myself, a little voice might say, yeah, you do. And you'll smile and it'll feel really good. Or a little voice might say, do you really?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be honest, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, and you did this. And that's simple exercise of just connecting with yourself. And either A, reinforcing your love for yourself, or B, opening up an opportunity to reflect on any areas where perhaps that love isn't being truly expressed.
Yeah.
Well, once we have a consciousness around what we're doing right for ourselves and what we're doing wrong for ourselves, it gives us the opportunity to improve. And I have found that my expertise in terms of working with people is dictated not by my complicated processes, but much more the simple philosophies, the simple tools, the simple things that we can do that are the most impacting.
Yeah.
The simple thing before you go to sleep and before you wake up, putting your hand over your heart and saying to yourself that you love yourself, either produces the examples of that you can do more of, are the examples where you aren't and that you should address. And that simple awareness alone is probably one of the biggest catalysts for change I see in people. So it's not the complicated stuff, it's the little things. And that as a little thing is hugely impactful.
Absolutely. And I love that because that is what my objective is when I started my podcast, Simplifying Life with Kashira. It all started with that simple thought that our lives are incredibly simple and we complicate them with our thoughts.
Yeah.
If we just
Yeah.
focus on that part and keep it simple, it'll just be a different life, a different world altogether. Thank you for
Yeah.
adding on to that. That was beautiful.
Pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Jamie, so much. And everyone out there, you don't really need to wait for breakdown to choose breakthrough. Today's conversation with Jamie White is a clear reminder that success without self doesn't feel like success at all. So, if you've been looking for permission to choose joy, alignment, and a life that feels good on the inside, consider this your sign. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you so much, Amy, for sharing your wisdom and your heart with us today. Really appreciate your time.
A pleasure. Absolute pleasure.